Okay, guys, we're going to go over 3.2 number 1. This is like a throwback to integrated 2. The reason why this ready is here, so again, ready is like this idea of prepping you for what's going to come, what's coming, what is already here, but also it's stuff that you should have remembered from a past class, okay? So I'm going to teach you how to write an equation from a graph for this. And we all know this is a quadratic because at number 1 it says, number 2 we know this shape, right? So the very first thing that I do is I take a look at anything that's gonna help me with the writing this function, right? And so far, the things that I see that may help me is the y-intercept, which is -6, right? And then I've got this other point up here, which is an x-intercept, and another intercept over here, which is another x-intercept. Okay, so if you remember from integrated 2 or from, let's see, what would that be? Algebra 1, if you're taking that. The x-intercepts play a really important role when you're in quadratics, okay? So they're also called your solutions. They're also called your roots. They're really important. And so because these are your roots, right? And this is just my fancy way of getting you to remember, x is equal to -2 and x is equal to 3, right? Because these are your roots, then that means the step above this function before you use the zero product property basically said x plus 2 and x minus 3 equals to 0. So if you remember way back then, when you had the zero product property, you had parentheses times parentheses equals to 0. Well, that's a really fancy property, which basically, if you remember when you were first learning how to do multiplication tables, your favorite multiplication table was probably 0. And that's because anything times 0 is going to give me 0. Now here's my anything. I forced this one to be 0. What makes this 0? Well, 3 makes it 0. Okay, and then the whole thing would equal to 0. So what makes this guy equal to 0? Well, that's -2. So at -2 and 3, I have zeros, which is another name for these x-intercepts, because it's reminding you that that's when the function equals to 0. So 0 here, a 0 here. So what values are those? -2 and 3. So how does that help me write my function? That helps me write my function because look, there's my function right there. The only fixes that I really need to go through is to see if there's a multiplier all the way out in front, like an a term. Right, so in this case, I don't know if there is, but the way I can check it is by plugging in 0, I should get out -6. If I don't get out -6, that means I have some kind of multiplier stretching my parabola or compressing my parabola. So I think that this is my function. So I'm going to plug in -6 just to make sure. So here's me checking my function. And I'm going to plug in -6. So I'm going to go blank plus 2, blank minus 3. And then this is my y, right? And then I'm going to plug in that -6 there. Sorry, -6. Sorry, my bad. I'm going to plug in 0 as my x. Oh, it's not even catching up to me. Ooh. Okay, so here's my check. Sorry, I'm going to slow it down so that you guys can all catch up with my talking now. So in my function, I think that this is my function, x plus 2 times x minus 3. So I'm going to plug in this point right here, 0, -6, 0 and for x. And I'm hoping that it'll come out as -6. There it goes. Yay. Yeah. So then I'm hoping that y becomes -6. So I'm going to plug in. So 0 plus 2 is 2 times -3. That's -6, which that's exactly my y right there, right? That's exactly it. So I'm happy. This is my function. So what did you do again, Ms. Johnson? Well, I started with my x-intercepts and I remembered that if these are my x-intercepts, x is equal to -2 and x is equal to 3, then the line above that is x plus 2 equals to 0 and x minus 3 equals to 0, right? And so there's my two factors for my parabola. And I think that this is right. The only thing I have to check is if my a is something other than 1. And then so now what I'll do is I'll plug in this point 0, -6 to see if this works. And when I plugged in 0, I got out -6. So that's my function. Okay, so my function is y equals to x plus 2, x minus 3. Okay. Hopefully that makes sense. Yes, ma'am.